DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can hear all of our episodes over on DogWorksRadio.com. Be sure to check us out on social media by searching DogWorks Radio. Today we're going to talk about the movie Togo, and I am joined by my co-host Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going today?
It's going great, Robert. We're recording this on winter solstice, which in the Northern Hemisphere anyway is the shortest day of the year, the longest night. And from here on, it keeps getting lighter every day. And I know up there in Alaska, at first it's just, a few seconds and then like a minute or two at a time. But this is the shortest day of the year. And from here on in, we start adding more and more sunlight.
We do, and it's going to turn out to be a beautiful winter. At least our fingers are crossed in terms of snow here in the Mat-Su Valley, and hopefully we get to do a lot of the races and expeditions that we have planned. Today is a special day, Alex. We're going to talk about the movie Togo, which is airing right now on Disney+, and if you do not have Disney+, the streaming service, you can get a 7-day free trial right there on any smart TV or streaming service or whatever you have. But I am excited about this. You and I have done a heck of a lot of work on the Serum Run over the years, and this is going to be a story that really ties in to everything that we do. Isn't that right?
It really is, and it's kind of timely now because earlier this week we were sad to hear about the death of Mitty Johnson, who is comes from a very storied mushing family. He ran the Iditarod in 2010. He was mayor of Unalakleet. Several of his brothers have also run the Iditarod. But perhaps most importantly, at least as far as this topic goes, he is the grandson of Henry Ivanoff, who was one of the 1925 Serum Run mushers, and in fact was the musher who handed the antitoxin off to Leonard Seppala. So it's very sad to hear about his passing. He was very young, and we send our condolences to his friends and family. But it is also a chance for us to celebrate the role that his family played in this very important event.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to all the tie-ins that we do. For our folks that are listening today, we have a little bit of an outline that we're going to follow. We're going to talk about the story itself, and then some of the character development, the historical accuracy, and get Alex's take since he's a filmmaker. You're going to get my take as a musher, and then our recommendations at the end, whether we think it's a thumbs up or thumbs down. Alex, can you give us sort of a brief synopsis about what the movie is about, at least from it on film, not necessarily the historical part yet?
Yeah, so this is basically the story of Leonard Seppala, who was a legendary musher, and he lived outside of Nome and with his wife, and it's the story of not only the 1925 Serum Run, but also of the very special bond he had with a dog named Togo, who went on to be his lead dog in his role in the 1925 Serum Run. So it kind of goes back and forth between what happened during the Serum Run and how Togo came to be part of Seppala's kennel and really part of his family, and it tells those two stories more or less in tandem.
Yes, and the star of the movie is Willem Dafoe. He plays the role of Leonard Seppala. Then we have Julianne Nicholson, who plays his wife. And then, of course, the star of the show is Togo himself. And I believe he or she, I'm not sure if it's a male or a female, if there's more than one dog, comes from a kennel in Minnesota. And boy, right from the start, he really takes the show, doesn't he?
He really does, and it's I do want to jump in just maybe messing up the outline just a little bit, and say that, and I'm not going to have any spoilers for this, but pretty much in the first 30 seconds of this movie, I knew that this was going to be something special, because I've seen and I've shot a lot of footage of sled dogs, and I've seen a lot of things where you see sled dogs running, or you see a team running towards the camera. But this movie opens with a shot that's not quite in focus, and then it gradually comes into focus, and you're not sure at first what you're looking at, and then it becomes clear that what you're looking at is a tracking shot from the side that is just showing Togo, just showing this lead dog. And it was striking because I realized I have never seen a shot quite like this before. And what it shows is it shows really clearly the dog running. So you can see all of his muscles moving, and then you can see how the dog is put in the harness, and how the movements of the dogs directly are translated through the harness to the lines to help move the sled. And all of that happens in just a couple of seconds. And I think that really showed you that this is something special, something we haven't quite seen before, and also made it clear that this is, at the end of the day, going to be a movie that is really about the dogs.
I loved that shot, and it was a great lead into the movie. And as a musher, I tell you what, I got goosebumps in the first few seconds of the movie. We were sitting there watching it last night, my wife Michelle and I, and we knew that this was going to be something really cool. And in pure Disney fashion, it truly is all about the dogs, and it's shot from several different perspectives in terms of that. You see that Disney part of it that you're so used to if you've seen other mushing movies like Eight Below and Iron Will and all of these. It has that flair to it, but it has that real mushing part of it too, doesn't it, Alex?
It really does. And, I've heard some people and some reviewers describe this as being kind of an old-fashioned movie, and it is, but it's not old-fashioned in terms of it being hokey. And that was, going into this, that was my big fear, is that it would be a really hokey movie that would have some great scenery and some great shots of the dogs. But it really, I think, gets it really gets a lot of things very, very right in terms of I think the mushing experience, although you can speak more to that, but also in terms of the bond that people have with dogs and the role that these dogs play. So it was a very, very, very effective in that sense.
So in the movie, as you mentioned, it's sort of a going back in time, and then sort of a kind of a current era in terms of the Serum Run mushing experience. But it really was sort of a coming of age movie for the dog Togo, and you see the trials and tribulations of Leonard Seppala and his wife contemplating on what they're going to do with this pup, and he's sort of the outcast, and he has a strong personality. All things that mushers immediately understand. And he talks about how he's not fit to be a lead dog, and he's temperamental, and just always getting into mischief. But that really leads into the story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And one of the remarkable things about this is how it portrays. It doesn't go into a lot of detail about the other dogs, but it makes it really clear that every dog has his or her own personality. And I think sometimes people think that you have to adapt that there's a problem with you want all the dogs on one team to be a certain way, but the really great mushers and the mushers who I think tend to be more successful are the ones who realize fairly early that every dog is different, and that you adapt the team to the personalities of the dogs rather than the other way around.
Right. So the story leads up to Togo becoming the lead dog on Seppala's team, and of course, anybody that knows the story, they know that Togo was an old dog at that point. He was 12 years old when he took off towards Ninana to get the serum on the relay, and it sort of plays out in kind of typical dramatic Disney fashion, where the dog saves the day, and everything sort of leads up to that crescendo of the serum reaching Nome, which is of course what the story is all about. But I tell you what, Alex, before we move over to the serum run itself and the historical accuracy and all that, but what did you think about those last few minutes of the film? I know everybody that I've talked to on Facebook or seen their posts, that was the scene that got them. And I tell you what, I think there was a heck of a lot of tears streaming down people's faces after that last few minutes of the film, don't you think?
Absolutely. And one of the beautiful things about this movie, and it was written by a guy named Tom Flynn, who I think just did a terrific job in the script, but one of the points that the William Dafoe character makes sort of late in the movie is he realizes that what really motivated Togo as a dog was wanting to be with him, and the way the movie stresses the bond between Seppala and Togo is, I think, very, very moving. And that last scene and the last little bit in the movie, I think, is very, very emotionally powerful and really, really effective.
Yeah, I had goosebumps throughout the whole movie, but I tell you what, that really caught me, because as a musher, and I'm going to talk much more about this later on, that truly harnessed that bond that we have with our dogs, and just that powerful bond that we have is just so amazing. So let's tie in some things to the movie. Alex, first off, let's talk about our series. A couple of years ago, right about this time, we released a series on our podcast, and it was all about the serum run. And you wrote and produced it and hosted it and all that. And I heard some quotes that you had put into that series, some of the newsreel and that sort of stuff was playing in this movie. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the series and sort of how it tied in to this movie itself?
Yeah, so we did a couple years ago a limited series on the serum run, sort of covering in episodes that I think were mostly about 15 to 20 minutes long, various aspects of the serum run, sort of an overview of it, and then getting down to the details about how the serum run actually worked, and how the antitoxin was brought from Anchorage to Fairbanks to Ninana, and then out to on dog sleds out to Nome. And one of the things that happened, and I think the movie does a fairly good job of making this clear, is that although it was theoretically possible to get the antitoxin to Nome by plane, most of the planes at the time that they had in Alaska, at least, were open cockpit planes, so there was no real protection from the cold. And then they were also mainly, it says in the script, and I'm not positive this is true, but I believe it's true that the planes they had were also all had water-cooled engines, so they were not really that reliable when it got down too far below freezing. So it made it clear that the only real viable way to get this antitoxin to Nome was by dog sled. And originally the plan was that Leonard Seppala, who was considered the premier and best musher in the world at the time and had won the All Alaska Sweepstakes several times, he was going to go all the way to Nenana, get the antitoxin, and bring it back. And then after he had set out, the governor decided that it would be faster and more efficient to do a relay of various dog teams. So Seppala was already on the trail and didn't know this, and they launched this system of dog sled relays to get the antitoxin much further up, and then he would take it back to Nome. And it then required getting word to him that this was going to happen, and making sure that that he would rendezvous with the antitoxin and bringing it back. And there are several really good and dramatic scenes where Seppala nearly misses Henry Ivanov, who is going to rendezvous with him, because Seppala doesn't really know that somebody is looking for him, and that he thinks he's going much farther. So I thought that was all done really well. And then ultimately, Seppala did not make it all the way back to Nome, but handed the serum off to a couple of other teams, and then finally Gunnar and Balto brought the serum into Nome and sort of were celebrated as the heroes, ignoring the fact that Seppala had gone much, much further than any other musher or any other team.
And I believe in your series, as well as in the movie, it said that Leonard Seppala went about 274 miles, and the other relay mushers went about 31. And I know in your series you talk about that. You sort of do a section-by-section storytelling of what's happening, and also you did quite a bit of work with the news part of it, and I know that the movie did that as well. It was a big news event at this time, and I know in the movie it talked about how the word spread over the telegraph in Seattle and Chicago and New York and all of that, and I thought that was a really cool scene, how they did that and how they sort of portrayed this top of the world, out in the middle of nowhere event taking place, and how it sort of tied everybody in as a country. And I think it did a really good job about that. And I know Michelle commented that they did a great job with that in showing different cultures, different races, different parts of sort of urban life. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I thought all of those things were really terrific. And sometimes in movies like this, when you see things that are depicting sort of minority cultures or native cultures, it's done in a bit of a condescending way sometimes. And I noticed that there was credited a special native advisor. So I assume that there was some sensitivity into that and some real strong desire to get those parts of the culture, especially the culture of Native Alaskans, right. And I felt like it did a really good job of that. It was clear that there were a lot of natives in the movie. The movie didn't particularly make a big deal about that or feel like it had to over-explain it, but that was an important part of the story. And I agree with you. I think it was done very, very well.
A couple of other quick tie-ins we've talked a lot about on this show about our upcoming trip on the Serum Run Trail expedition that's going to follow this very same route. We're going to go from Nenana to Nome starting in February of 2020, and they've done that trip several times. Norman Vaughn formed a nonprofit many years ago, and they did a trip very similar to this over the years. But what was really exciting, Alex, in terms of tie-in, was the Iditarod connection and Martin Bucer. And I just saw some pictures right before we went on air where he had taken some pictures on the set, and he was the stunt double for Willem Dafoe, and they had on the same outfits and all this. And, of course, you know, all those tie-ins together. What do you think about that Martin Bucer connection?
You know, I thought that was very cool when I first heard that he was involved with this. And I believe that he also may have provided some of the sled dogs that were used in some of the scenes, and I know that he did a lot of work with the sled dogs and a lot of work with Willem Dafoe to try to make it look, to try to make it look natural and organic and not like it's a Hollywood guy who has never actually been on a sled. And Martin Bucer, as our listeners know, and as most Iditarod fans know, is a four-time Iditarod champion and someone who has really, for many, many years, made it his part of his life work to get people excited about sled dogs. He has open houses at his kennel. He's very inviting to. I think most of the time they have rookie orientation, or part of the rookie orientation is at his kennel, and he's very open to giving tours and having fans come up there. So this is a guy who really has been for several decades a great ambassador to the world of mushing, and I just think that it's terrific that he was involved, and I can't point to anything directly, but I have to think that he helped make it seem much more authentic than it might have otherwise.
A couple other Iditarod tie-ins. One of the most coveted Iditarod awards is the Leonard Seppala Award. That's one that most mushers in Iditarod aspire to get, and that is that the Humanitarian or the Dog Care Award? Alex, do you know?
I think that's the Dog Care Award, and I believe that's also one that is voted by the other mushers. So it's not just people who weren't on the trail. It's all the people on the trail who've noticed how someone has handled themselves and their dogs, voting on it.
And being that it be the Dog Care Award, and that really showed in the movie, didn't it, Alex, about his care of his dogs, and we've talked about that bond that he has. I think that's a really close tie-in to both Iditarod and this movie itself. One last tie-in with the Iditarod for folks that do not know. I don't know what the proper term is. I guess it would be stuffed. But Togo's stuffed body is there at the Iditarod headquarters here in Wasilla, and it really brings everything true to life when you see that dog, doesn't it?
It really does. And, long before I knew a lot about the Serum Run, or before I knew a lot about mushing history, I had gone to the Iditarod headquarters and was, just seeing Togo there was part of what made me learn more about this and made me want to know more about what the history really was.
So earlier you learned about First Paw Coffee Company, and now I'm going to tell you about its Tail Wagger Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Tail Wagger Blend is their first offering, and its name and label were crowdsourced from their Facebook fans. How cool is that? The Tail Wagger Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It is a medium roast from Colombian beans with tastes of Brazil nuts, grapefruit, and oak. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.
So let's jump over to character development. I just want to spend a minute or so on this because we've already talked quite a bit about it, but I'm going to go with the dog side of it. We talked a little bit about where Togo and some of the others' dogs came from, but this is not your typical Disney movie where, all the dogs are show dogs and, all fluffy and pretty and all that. They truly look like sled dogs, didn't they?
They did, and you could see they got dirty. They showed Togo tunneling to get out of his cage, and going into the mud, and it really, I think, showed some of what really goes into raising a kennel. I did notice, and I almost hesitate to bring this up because it makes me seem like I'm 5 years old, but I did notice that for a movie about sled dogs, I don't think I saw a single instance of anyone scooping poop. And that's something that mushers always talk about a lot. But, this is a family-friendly movie, so that's understandable, I suppose.
Right. So let's go to that, the historical accuracy of the movie. And this has been the big talking point so far in the last 24 hours or so, with in particular with the mushers that are seeing this movie. And we'll say right off the bat that it is not anywhere near Nome, Alaska, and a heck of a lot of the terrain does not look like anything around the area of Nome. Of course, those huge mountains and the drop-offs, and that was all definitely a creative license there. But what do you think about the historical aspect of it, and what are your thoughts of sort of how it played out in terms of realism and keeping to that true story of it?
Well, when it comes to that, my real problem is the last half hour, basically after the serum gets to Nome, there's a lot of creative license that is taken with the facts of exactly what happened with Cephala and with Togo, and there are several things that are kind of conveniently ignored or swept under the rug. I don't have that much of a problem with that because I do feel that it served the story well, and these days it almost feels like you need to give people who are really knowledgeable something to complain about. I too saw a lot of mushers complaining about how the scenes, which I believe were mostly or all shot in Alberta, don't look anything like Nome. And it reminded me, I don't know if you remember this, but way back in the 80s, they had this thing on Late Night with David Letterman where they would do this series that they called Limited Perspectives, where they would have movie reviews by people who are not movie reviewers. So they had, for example, a dentist who reviewed the movie Reds and talked about how people's teeth back in the early 1900s didn't look like the actors' teeth. And they had a martial artist who reviewed the movie Gandhi, and apparently there might be a fight somewhere in Gandhi, and he was criticizing the fight. And I feel like that is a little bit what people are doing and focusing so much on the fact that, well, there aren't trees like that in Nome, or Nome doesn't look quite like that. And while I think it's important to get most of those details right, ultimately, I don't think it really matters in terms of what the story is and what the emotional attachment that viewers are going to have to these characters and these events.
You know what I really thought they got right was the costumes or the clothing and the harnesses on the dogs and the sleds and all that. That looked really close in terms of historical accuracy. I really liked Cephala's parka. If you see the old-time pictures of Leonard Cephala and Togo, he has on a parka that is very similar to that. I thought that was dead on. Don't you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. It looked so accurate that there were a couple of times where there were shots of the lines, and the lines sort of being pulled and stretched, and the lines look they're similar, but they look significantly different from your modern lines that you see on a dog team. And I found myself thinking, oh my God, that's just a piece of rope that could break.
Right. And speaking of it breaking, of course, the Disney moment of the whole movie where Togo saved the day jumping through the sea ice. that was a fun scene. It probably could never happen in terms of a dog team, but I really enjoyed that. For folks that are mushers, they will see very quickly in the dog sled setup, you'll see the bungee cord that is there, which I'm pretty sure they didn't have back in 1925. But I really enjoyed the costuming and the boots and all of that. And as a musher, I just thought that stuff was so cool. Let's move on to the filmmaker's perspective. Alex, you're a filmmaker. That's what you do for a living. You've done a movie about the sport of dog sledding and the Iditarod. Give us sort of the behind-the-scenes nuts and bolts, your thoughts on just sort of this process as a filmmaker and sort of the task that they had to take under to do something like this.
My biggest fear going in was that this was going to be a hokey movie, and it really wasn't. There were some of the scenes where people are debating what to do about the diphtheria epidemic that weren't quite as smooth as I might have liked, but for the most part, it's a really, really well done movie. The pacing is fantastic. The scenery of the outdoors and of the dogs running on sleds and pulling sleds is just phenomenal. And while I do have some minor issues with some of the story beats, overall, it was a very emotionally powerful movie. And at the end of the day, we can talk about the trees and the bungee cords, and we can talk about, how the scene where he crosses the Norton Sound looks almost like a science fiction movie, and maybe it was not quite that dramatic, but all of these things work in service of the story. And at the end of the day, I think for most people, and maybe there's a musher exception to this rule, but for most people, the movie lives or dies based on the emotional content, and do you actually care about these people and this dog and what's going on? And all of that really works. So I just was very, very impressed by the movie overall, and I expected it to look great. The director Erickson Core apparently shot a lot of this himself, as opposed to having a separate DP who would be doing most of the shooting. And I read an interview with him where he said that he had intended to use a lot more special effects, but when he got up to where they shot it in Alberta, it was just so gorgeous that he was able to use most of the, real practical scenery instead of having to do a lot of effect shots, which isn't to say there aren't effect shots, because there very clearly are. But I was really, really impressed with it on a technical level, on a story level, and mostly on an emotional level, which I think is what determines whether or not it works.
From a musher's perspective, I absolutely loved it. And of course, anytime movies come out about our sport, I'm the first one to watch it. And I'm usually the first one, at least in my family, to point out the things that are right and wrong. And this has been a great year for mushing movies and mushing events. We had the other movie that just came out, The Great Alaskan Race, and the new movie documentary Atla just came out. And it's been a great year for mushing on film. And I tell you what, this one hit all of the bases on a musher's perspective. And of course, having Martin Bucer not only as the stunt double, but I believe he was the technical side of it on the musher's point of view on what things should be done, whether it be right or wrong. And I think he did a lot of those scenes where they were going through the mountains and all that. I thought all of that was perfect. But more than anything, I loved how it showed the the life of a dog musher, raising pups and the pups in the pens and picking lead dogs, and how Togo wanted to be the leader and how he would run up front, and how they were switching dogs around, going from wheel to point to lead, and all that. All of that was just awesome. I really, really enjoyed that. And as you said, it was truly a dog movie to begin with, and I think that everything else sort of played into that. And of course, it was a Disney movie, so you have all that. You fall in love with the dog, and the dog becomes, kind of human-like and personable, which is perfectly fine. And I know I have a lot of those same emotions with my dogs, and how we have that bond. And I have so many of those same encounters with my dogs on a very real musher level, and I thought that was very well done on the movie itself. Alex, we have just a few more minutes. I want to give our recommendations. I know what they're going to be. We've already talked about it in the last 35 minutes or so, but what are your thoughts? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Would you ask people to sign up for Disney Plus and either do the free trial or the $7.99 a month or whatever? And how do you think that this will sort of play out in sort of film history, in terms of, mushing history with dogs, and, sort of how it'll play out? What are your thoughts on an overall movie standpoint, and how it will stand the test of time itself?
I first would give it a very enthusiastic thumbs up. I found myself, when I was watching it, part of me was wishing that I could see it in a theater, and wish that it had been released in theaters. And there are some of the scenes that I would love to see just on a gigantic screen. But overall, I'm really happy that they decided to do it on Disney Plus, because if it had been released in theaters, it's a very crowded time for movies now, and there's Star Wars, and there's like a bunch of other very high-profile movies, and it is likely that if this had been released in theaters, it might have played for a week or two, and then it would have disappeared, and then by the time it got onto DVD and onto streaming services, that would probably be 4 or 5 months later, and people would have forgotten about it. But as it is now, the same number of people can see it on Disney Plus in the first week or two, and that is a much more significant thing, and it's something that will get a lot more people excited. So I think this was a very good move to have it on Disney Plus, also because it's, Disney Plus is still very, very new. There's not a lot else that has been done in terms of high-profile original content aside from the Star Wars Mandalorian show. So I think that it lets it get a lot more bang for the buck, and with a little bit of promotion, I think it's going to do extremely, extremely well. And from what I've seen just online and people talking about it, I think it's going to be a movie that is very well remembered over the years. And I think a lot of people, we've talked in the past, and a lot of Mushing fans have talked in the past about how, not to knock Balto, but Balto sort of received a lot of the credit for what all of the dogs did, and especially for what Togo did. And so it's nice to see a movie that is kind of addressing that. The one other thing that I wanted to add is that I think pretty much every musher I've talked to has had the experience where they've had one dog who is just special and extraordinary. And while a lot of these dogs don't perhaps rise to the level of what Togo did in terms of achievements, I think everyone who has dogs, and everyone who especially has a kennel and is racing dogs, recognizes that there's sometimes that one extraordinary dog comes along. And this movie did a really, really good job of putting that relationship and that bond between the musher and the dog into really relatable, sharp focus. So I think that is there's a lot of things to like about this movie, but for me, that was the best part of it.
Oh, I agree, and I too give it a very big thumbs up. And you talked about that one special dog. You know, you hear those stories about Jeff King's famous dog and Dallas Seavey's dogs that won the golden harness and all that. And my dog was my dog Aneke, who our kennel is named after. He was the Togo in our team who would fit that bill as well. I too think it's going to stand up very well on Disney Plus. I still watch the movie Iron Will, the other Mushing movie that was really, really good back in the day. I think it came out in the mid '90s, and I still watch that movie today. So I think it's going to be up there for people to watch for many years. Again, excellent movie. It hit all the bases for me. Who cares if it didn't look like Gnome? I think everything else was very well done, and I cannot recommend this enough to not only my mushing friends, but to anybody that just wants to sit down and really enjoy a couple hours movie about sled dogs and about the bond that we have. Alex, we have about a minute left. Anything else you want to say in closing?
You know, it's just so great to see a bunch of movies that are really high quality coming out about mushing. As you said, it's been a really good year for mushing on film, and this is a very great addition to that.
I agree. Thanks a lot for joining us today here on Mushing Radio. And if you guys have comments, shoot us a message over on our social channels. Just search for Dogworks Radio. And be sure to check out our series on the Serum Run by searching for Serum Run on dogworksradio.com. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.